Today we are going to make a date nut loaf. What we have soaking here is 1 cup of chopped dates mixed with half a cup of chopped walnuts, and it is soaking in 1 cup of boiled water. So while you prepare your other ingredients for your loaf, this just sits and soaks. Then you're going to measure 1 cup of flour into a sifter, because the flour has to be sifted. I have pre-measured this because you don't need to know how to measure. I'm sure this is the half a cup. So it's 1½ cups of flour, to which I am going to add some salt. And I believe it is half a teaspoon of salt. Now I'm pretty careful about my salt intake, generally speaking. So if you'll notice, I don't necessarily measure right up to the half mark because I kind of cut back on the salt intake in our diet. And now all I'm going to do is sift the flour and the sugar together. Or pardon me, the salt. I think I was thinking about the sugar because I want to remember to tell you something about how you measure the brown sugar. I'll tell you right now. You have to measure 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar for this recipe. Now, I like dates a lot, so I taste them when I'm chopping the nut. And sometimes dates are really sweet, and other times they're just sweet. I found the dates for this recipe to be probably pretty sweet. So when we come to the brown sugar, I'll show you that I don't measure a very generous cup of brown sugar. Likewise, because I like dates a lot in my recipes, when I measure my chopped dates into my cup, it's a generous amount of chopped dates that I use. Okay, so there's the flour and the salt, and all we're going to do is set that aside temporarily. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to cream 1/4 cup of butter, which I've already measured out, in a large mixing bowl. And I'm pretty cognizant about taking every last square inch of butter I can, or any other ingredient. I'm not a big waster. You can run your kitchen as you like, but I like to be pretty accurate, and I like to get every scrap of my butter into my bowl. You'll also notice that my kitchen is not equipped the way the fancy kitchens are, and I use a handheld mixer. So all you're going to do is cream butter. It's pretty easy. I suggest you make sure your butter is soft, so I keep mine in the cupboard. You take it straight out of the fridge, it's too hard to measure, and it takes much longer to cream. This is noisy. Now, I'm just going to cut away here for a minute while I mix this, and then we'll come back. Now once your butter is nicely creamed, I hope you can see this, it's just really soft, then you have to add your brown sugar gradually. Now as I mentioned, I don't really have a generous 3/4 cup measure, but it's 3/4 of a cup. Now you really can't fool around in baking with your measurements, but with things like brown sugar, you know, if it's a ½ tablespoon or so short, it's not really a big deal. So you're going to add your sugar. And now you have to cream your butter and your sugar thoroughly. You also have to remember that if your brown sugar is at all lumpy, this is going to take a while. And don't think you can get away with leaving some lumps in your bowl. It doesn't work for your baking because brown sugar is a little bit different than white sugar. It doesn't dissolve that easily. So you have to be really sure that you've got everything nicely creamed together. So this is going to take me a few minutes. The other thing I might want to mention is the list of all the ingredients for this date nut loaf. Gee, I'm having trouble saying that today. Will be at the end of the recipe. So if you're not getting it right away, don't worry about it because it will be there. So I'm just going to keep creaming this, and then we'll come back in a minute. Now, my mother taught me, probably because she used to give truly farm fresh eggs, that before you put an egg in anything, you should always break it into a saucer to make sure that, God forbid, there's no little baby chickens happening here. So, and I've got a little bit of shell in here, and the trick with shell is to take it out with the other shell. So to the creamed mixture of the butter and the brown sugar, I am now going to add 1 egg, and we're going to mix that up very thoroughly. So again, with your mixer, you just mix it. I know for all of you folks who have the nicer, large, freestanding mixers, you can be doing other stuff. But me, I have to keep holding this and mixing. So we'll come back in just a minute. Okay, to the date nut mixture, we are going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Now you have to appreciate that once you add soda to this hot mixture, or now it's pretty just warm mixture, your soda starts activating. So you can't really be wasting a lot of time. There's the 1 teaspoon, and I'm adding that. And then you just give that a stir. And you can see this mixture is nicely creamed and it's ready to go. So what you're going to do now is alternately between your dry ingredients and your baking soda, nuts, and date mixture, you're going to mix your ingredients and you're going to make sure they get mixed really well. And as I said, you've got to have a little bit of speed involved with this procedure now because the soda is activating. So you can see you're just mixing it nicely together. Remember to scrape your sides. Also remember to turn your oven on to 350 to preheat it. Now while we're mixing this, I'm just going to continue with this and you can just come back to me in a minute. Okay, we're almost to the end of the mixing. I'm just going to pause that for a minute and show you. I've done all the dry ingredients. This is the last now of the wet mixture that goes in. And as I said, I'm pretty diligent about scraping every last morsel out of everything. So I'm pretty cautious about doing that properly, or conscientious, I guess. The other thing I'd like to mention is I have prepared my pan ahead of time. And I do this, it doesn't matter what I'm doing with my loaf, or what I'm doing with loaf baking. I use parchment paper. So what I've done is I've prepared this pan by using a little bit of oil, or in this case Crisco, and then I've cut and put my parchment paper in. And I've done this for 2 reasons. It's very, very easy to burn a dense loaf. It's also easy this way to take the loaf out of the pan, and in particular this is going to be important to me because this loaf is actually being baked for a church supper this evening. Now sometimes when it's just for my husband and I, it's okay to leave it in the loaf pan and we just slice it as we go. And normally we gobble beans pretty quickly, so they're not going to get stale if we leave it just in a pan and covered. Okay, the mixture is all done. I'm just going to get rid of my beaters here because again there's a lot of good food left on there and I don't like to waste anything. Now this recipe does call for a loaf pan that is 9 by 5. My loaf pan might be just a wee bit bigger at 9.5. No big deal. I don't get too worked up about stuff like that. You don't want to use a much bigger one, of course, because then your loaf will look a little funny in the in the end result, rather. But this loaf is going to look just fine coming out of this size. This is a very, very old-fashioned recipe that I happened to clip from a newspaper. And the lady who published it in the paper found it in a heritage cookbook. So this is a really nice old recipe. It's excellent.
I'm slightly modified.
And the only modification that I've made to it, really, as I said, is how I measure my brown sugar, and the fact that I put it in a loaf pan and bake it with parchment paper. Those are really small issues, non-issues, really. Now, one other modification, and I'm just going to show you. This parchment paper I left a little long so you could see it, but I'm just going to give it a little trim. If you've never used parchment paper, rest assured it does not catch fire in your oven. It's just perfect. Now, here's a little decoration that I like to do to it to add some interest to my loaf. I sprinkle a little extra bit of walnut on the top, and I'm just going to swirl that in a wee bit, not a lot, just to make it kind of go in. And I don't want the nuts to get burned on the top. Basically, that's why you cover it a little bit with your batter. And I don't know, that was probably 3 tablespoons, maybe a little more of a little bit of extra walnut there. Now, of course, you can leave the walnut out if you have an allergy, but your loaf will certainly be a lot different. So, we're going to pop this in the oven, and it's going to have to bake now for about an hour. And I check that every half hour. And that's a quick date nut loaf, and I'll show you the end result when we come back. Okay, we're going to take the loaf out now. It's baked for a little over 50 minutes. It's likely done. I test my loaf in 2 ways. I give it a tap, it feels very firm, but a loaf is very dense. So I take a toothpick and I put it right into the middle of the loaf, like so. And if it comes out nice and dry, it tells me we're totally baked, and it is. This loaf is now ready. And because I've put it on parchment paper, it's very easy to slip out and let it cool. Just like that. It'll cool faster because it's out of a hot baked pan. And I need this to cool because, as I have mentioned, we're taking this to a church supper, and before I take it, I want to get it sliced. And that's what the baked loaf looks like.